though they were a gift to you, and to have somebody come in and take that away and not know where or why or how is the not knowing. How can you grieve? How can you deal with not knowing?
Is it acceptable that we allowed our most vulnerable to disappear, to be murdered? The question is upsetting. It challenges our fundamental values.
Are society's most vulnerable women treated the same way as anybody else?
For at least 4 decades, women have gone missing from Highway 16.
Families of the mostly First Nations women who died along Highway 16, known as the Highway of Tears, encouraged investigators to keep going.
The families are hoping that the renewed attention will provide more momentum into the investigation and public pressure until all of the cases are solved. But until there are more arrests, the Highway of Tears will be a dark shadow over the lives of people here.
Why does it seem BC has so many serial killers?
British Columbia, the westernmost province of Canada, bordering with Alaska, the Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Alberta. The largest city is Vancouver, with an estimated population of over 2.3 million, ranking it the second largest city in the Pacific Northwest. Prince George, known as the Gateway to the North, has a population of over 84,000. It's the fourth largest city in the province. For the last 40 years, women have been disappearing and turning up murdered along the Highway of Tears, a name given to a 724-kilometer stretch of road from Prince George to Prince Rupert. Infamous for this series of murders and the harsh injustices that could also span the same figurative distance. The North is dominated by industries focusing on its vast natural resources like the forestry, mining, fishing, energy, and agricultural sectors. While economic growth is strong, the division of wealth sharing still isn't in place, forcing much of the smaller communities to live below the poverty level with an unemployment rate as high as 92% in some First Nations reservations. The Highway of Tears is the nucleus of a much larger problem on how the Indigenous population has been treated since colonialism. These murders aren't just the work of serial killers, but the sad result of systemic and socioeconomic issues that have plagued the First Nations communities for generations.
It's such a vast area geographically, and that's a concern for us as well, because we have a number of people who look at that as a crime of opportunity. They might not be leaving that day thinking that they're going to find someone and hurt them, but it's that mental thought that nobody would ever know what happened to this individual. You know, so many different places for them to hide, so many different places for them to get rid of the evidence.
A lot of road, a lot of country. And for every kilometer of paved road that you see, there's probably 1,000 kilometers of gravel road that would align with that. So it's this massive, massive country.
The basic point is that it is not just one murder, it's there are serial murders, and also people who are very opportunistic and copycats. So there are women who are still going missing and still being murdered on the highway.
You know, believe it or not, even though, you know, there's been lots of media, I guess, relatively speaking, around the Highway of Tears, there's lots of people that don't know what that is.
Well, the Highway of Tears really, you know, a lot of the First Nations women and why it's gotten so much notice stems from the 1990s when a lot of the young Aboriginal women went missing, and one of those women, actually, she was a teen. It was my cousin, Ramona Wilson.
When we really became aware of it was when it touched our family personally. So when my first cousin, Ramona Wilson, went missing, that was sort of the first thing. We'd always heard about things on TV, you know, but never really realizing how that would impact us until it happened to our family.
The information about the Highway of Tears really came out especially in 2002 when Nicole Hoare went missing. Previous to that, there were a lot of Aboriginal women and girls who'd gone missing and been murdered. But I think when Nicole Hoare, who was a smiling, happy-looking young woman in the pictures that were in the media, it really hit home for a lot of people. And all the news media picked up on this, and really the word got out.
She was last seen hitchhiking on Highway 16 on June 21st.
With Nicole's disappearance, the term Highway of Tears became increasingly known and widely used. Of most importance, the media and general public finally took notice that her disappearance was not an isolated incident.
I think for our communities it was frustrating because, you know, there was a number of missing Aboriginal women that were already missing.
Indigenous women and girls had gone missing for some time. They felt without adequate attention, and then a young white woman went missing, and there was a lot of press attention, and you know, suddenly this was something in the spotlight.
It's a bigger issue than just Nicole. It's, you know, it's our Aboriginal communities that have been searching for our own. and really trying to, get some justice.
These folks have been victimized twice. Once when their daughters, their sisters, their mothers have gone missing, and then a second time when the justice system has utterly failed them in the pursuit of the justice they so rightly deserve. There can be no solutions until we get to the truth and the heart of the matter. That this is a complex issue. The sources of this violence against Aboriginal women and girls is complex, but it is no possibility of finding those solutions unless we actually have the truth on the table. And the resistance from this government, time and time again, to have the courage and the leadership to approach this conversation and find that truth, is yet a third victimization of these families.
There's a lot of poverty in our communities. There's a lot of unemployment. There's a lot of issues with the generation of issues that comes with boarding schools, such as Indian residential schools.
And the effects of residential schools is going to carry on probably for a couple of more generations and underlies much of what we're talking about here. It underlies the Highway of Tears and just an obliteration of cultures through many policies over many years.
For nearly 150 years, the mandatory attendance of Aboriginal children aged 7 to 15 served in removing children from their families in order to kill the Indian in the child and assimilate Aboriginal youth into mainstream European Canadian culture. In these buildings, young Aboriginal children had their characters redesigned to fit the European model. They were not allowed to speak their native language, have any contact with their family, or practice any aspect of their culture. It took nearly 10 years for the government to partner with numerous Aboriginal organizations to begin efforts of reconciliation and provide counseling to survivors of the residential school program. This was launched in 2007, followed by a formal apology from Prime Minister Harper in 2008.
In the 1870s, the federal government, partly in order to meet its obligations to educate Aboriginal children, began to play a role in the development and administration of these schools. Two primary objectives of the residential school system were to remove and isolate children from the influence of their home, families, traditions, and cultures, and to assimilate them into the dominant culture. The Government of Canada built an educational system in which very young children were often forcibly removed from their homes, often taken far from their communities. Many were inadequately fed, clothed, and housed. All were deprived of the care and nurturing of their parents, grandparents, and communities. To the approximately 80,000 living former students and all family members and communities, the Government of Canada now recognizes that it was wrong to forcibly remove children from their homes, and we apologize for having done this.
Like when we went to residential, or people were going to residential school, the RCMP were the ones that came and got the kids if we hid them. And in our language, we call the RCMP Nischakan, and that means the people who take us away.
We conducted 5 weeks of field research in northern British Columbia just to get a full sense of the relationship between the RCMP and Indigenous women and girls in northern BC. We found that a number of women and girls had experienced a range of mistreatment, and that went all the way from inappropriate searches of women and girls by male officers, all the way up to physical assault, including beatings in cells, as well as sexual assault and rape.
Many of our people, you have to remember, don't trust the RCMP. So that's first and foremost, is that they have to try somehow to build some trust within the community.
I don't think that First Nations in general think that the RCMP are someone that they can go to for help. I think they've always been seen as perpetrators against our people.
We found that the levels of fear of retaliation by police for sharing information about what had happened were extremely high, about on par with situations that we had previously seen in conflict or post-conflict societies where the state authorities themselves have been involved in abuses.
I said to the RCMP, I said, what about those 2 men in Saskatoon or the natives that they took out and froze? Oh, that wasn't RCMP, that was Saskatoon police. I said, you guys are supposed to be peace officers, not beat officers.
It's really about establishing that trust and respect. So you look at, for example, the Ramsay case, right? Judge Ramsay. I mean, how many girls were victimized by the judge?
I think the Ramsay case is extremely important in understanding the context for the Highway of Tears. It's really hard to underestimate what it does to a community's faith in the justice system when you find out that a sitting judge has been sexually exploiting girls, children in the community for a long time with impunity.
Question, who polices the police? Who judges the judges?
Judge David Ramsay was sent to prison for sexually assaulting and buying sex from girls as young as 12. Ramsay was sentenced to a mere 7 years for sexually assaulting the teens. He was due for statutory release on January 30th, 2009, only 2/3 into his sentence. But he never got out of prison.
Judge Ramsay got something better. He got terminal cancer, he's dead. We all have to answer to someone bigger than our so-called justice system, the big guy in the sky.
And I'll tell you this right now, since the Ramsay cases occurred, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed within the justice system, nothing has changed in the RCMP to ensure that a Ramsay case never happens again. So obviously, like if a young woman is feeling victimized, who is she going to trust to go to?
The most striking thing to me when we were doing the research in northern BC was the sense of insecurity that women and girls, Indigenous women and girls, felt in their communities.
I come from a family that was not only victimized from the government institutions. We all know about the residential school era. Pretty much my whole family was affected by that. The result of a lot of that was alcohol abuse, drug abuse, violence. My mother, wanting obviously to have funds to look after her only son, she would do pretty much anything she could. And gambling was a form of that, bingo. And she won a nice sizable chunk of money, and it was late in the evening, and she was gonna use that money, come home, celebrate, but on her way from the bingo hall to the bus station, somebody took advantage of her, and obviously she's not here today.
When we look at violence against women, it's not just looking at the issue of women, it's also looking at the issue of men as well and their roles. In our society, in our Indigenous society, everybody has a role.
We need to not forget our men, and we need to be there to lift up our men and to hold them up so that they can be leaders and they can be warriors.
And I think what non-First Nations people don't realize is that, if somebody wants to go to college or somebody wants to go to do something in the city, right, it's not that big of a deal. You have a transit system, you have all that. Now, somebody from small little Tackle Lake First Nation, for example, where I come from, if they want to go to school, they have to go travel 3 hours on dirt road to get to Fort St. James. From Fort St. James to Prince George, it's about 2 hours. Now, if you don't have a vehicle, how are you going to get there? And a lot of our communities, it's 92% unemployment in some of our communities, right? So some people don't have vehicles. So there's that whole issue. And some of our young women are leaving communities because there's nothing there for them, or maybe one of the impacts of residential school is impacting them directly. So if you're looking to higher your education, if you're looking to go to a doctor's appointment, it's a totally different reality than somebody down south where all the services are accessible.
It's a rural area in the north. Some of the essential services that you might need access to are located in the bigger urban center, so a lot of going back and forth is needed. At the same time, the public transportation is extremely limited. You have the Greyhound bus that operates a very limited schedule, and if you don't have personal access to a vehicle, you can be in a really tough spot looking for rides with friends, or, as unfortunately in the case of some of the women who've disappeared, have been looking for a ride from a stranger on the highway.
My name is Brenda June Wilson, and I'm the sister of Ramona Lisa Wilson, who was murdered in 1994, June 11th. Her body was found outside the Smithers Airport by a couple of people that were 4x4ing. They got stuck. They went to look for some wood to get them out of the mud, and they came upon my sister's remains.
Ramona, she was such a young girl, you know, she was 15. You know, she had her life ahead of her. And since she went missing, since we found her body a year later in 1995, you know, we really saw, well, personally, I saw how much effect that would have on a parent. And I really saw it in my aunt, you know, my Aunt Matilda. And you see how much it's changed her. And it's quite, you know, it's devastating.
I think people really need to know that Ramona was not expendable. Like, Ramona was just not a street person or whatever the media kind of portrays or what society thinks, that these were like prostitutes, they were druggies, they were whatever, like as if that made their life any less worthy.
We saw as well, we can't ignore the fact that what happened on the pig farm in Port Coquitlam. And in that case, again, the women were just treated like they were throwaway.
Pickton solicited prostitutes from the downtown east side and drove them out to his pig farm in Port Coquitlam, a suburb of Vancouver. For years, his murders went unnoticed to law enforcement, even after several families reported their loved ones missing. Pickton was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The list began to grow as DNA of 33 women were found on his farm. He bragged to police that he killed as many as 49. The media covered the case and heavily portrayed the women as high-risk prostitutes and drug users from Vancouver's downtown east side, not as daughters, mothers, or loved family members. Families of the missing and murdered women had been pushing for public hearings prior to serial killer Robert Pickton's conviction of 6 murders. They were angered and wanted answers for their family members' deaths.
Why had all these women gone missing from the downtown east side of Vancouver, and why did it take so long for them to identify and arrest and then subsequently prosecute Robert Pickton, who was responsible for so many of those murders?
Finally, in September of 2010, a missing women's inquiry headed by Commissioner Wally Opal was initiated to examine the role of the Vancouver Police and the RCMP in the disappearances and murders of women in the downtown east side. Commissioner Wally Opal concluded that the RCMP did not conduct their investigations properly. The Pickton investigation and trial ended up costing taxpayers and the Canadian government over $100 million. How was he able to murder so many women without anyone taking notice?
It'd be much better if we recognize the victims and from their point of view understand why that happened and how to not let that continue. And media across the board would be just if there was more highlight on the victims.
There was a definite difference between the missing women with the Aboriginal community versus general society with non-First Nations women.
I think in addressing the Highway of Tears more broadly, though, what we have to think about is it shouldn't matter whether you're part of a task force or not. If someone calls and reports someone missing, you need to know that immediately that case is going to be taken seriously and is going to be pursued with the full effort of the RCMP.
I think the only time you're taken seriously is when someone is murdered.
The body of 14-year-old Aielah Saric-Auger was discovered on a Friday afternoon in February of 2006. A passing motorist spotted her remains in a ditch a few miles east of Prince George by Tabor Mountain on Highway 16.
And that investigation is still ongoing. We do not have a suspect at this time that's being held accountable for her murder, and so we're still receiving tips to this day on her disappearance.
When her body was found, the family had come to us, her mom had come to us and asked if we would be willing to go out there and to do ceremony in the place where her body was located.
When the young woman, Aielah Auger, had passed away, that was enough for us. We said enough. That something had to be done.
I felt that part of my responsibility as an elected Aboriginal leader within this community was to bring attention to the subject matter.
At the same time, Rena Zatorsky and Lately, she was at the same, she was upset as well. The Lately Nation were upset. So we already had planned on doing something. And so Rena came together and we all joined forces to have the symposium.
I released a news release asking for interest in a symposium to talk about the issues surrounding missing and murdered Aboriginal women specifically. And we organized it in about a month's time.
The 2006 Highway of Tears Symposium was an important moment for advocacy around the Highway of Tears cases because it allowed the community to come together to discuss exactly what had been happening and what a plan would look like to address the murders and disappearances.
That created that sort of critical mass for the community to really understand, hey, these aren't vulnerable women necessarily going missing, for instance, sex workers and drug-addicted women. This is happening to women of varying lifestyles and socioeconomic statuses.
I believe that the police actually started taking seriously the issues of missing and murdered women along the corridor seriously after the symposium. I think that the public really had to put pressure on them and essentially embarrass them to step up to the plate and take the issue seriously and start looking at what was happening, what's going on.
There were over 500 people there in attendance, including family members, RCMP, bigwigs with the provincial government.
There were about 92 organizations represented there. So to me, that really showed that this was an issue that was being taken seriously from the community itself. The police is a totally different story, but the community itself was extremely interested in the issue and wanted to talk about it and bring some awareness and solve some of the surrounding issues.
So when we had asked the questions to the families as to what could have been done, what could have the RCMP done better, what could have victim services done better, what could society have done better, and all the families went and answered that question, all the First Nation families. The last one that spoke was Jack Fowler, and we asked him the same questions.
And at the symposium, we probably had 3 or 4 families talk about their experiences prior to ourselves getting up, and in all cases it was the direct opposite of what we had experienced. So, and I did comment that it was not embarrassing, but very unsettling to see how we were treated versus the reaction that the other families had received.
He said when he went, him and his wife Betty went and reported their daughter missing, the RCMP were so helpful and so concerned, and they were right on top of the case right away.
And I think that really shows that, there definitely was that systemic racism that we keep referring to.
Certainly some of the police officers that we spoke with during our research talked about there being a very different attitude after the Nicole Hoare case, a very different attitude towards the murders and disappearances, then that they were taken much more seriously, and that before that they hadn't received nearly the attention that they were due.
I think, unfortunately, there were a lot of recommendations that came out of the Highway of Tears symposium that haven't been worked on or galvanized.
That a shuttle bus transportation system be established between each town and city located along the entire length of Highway 16, defined as the Highway of Tears. That the number, types, and frequency of essential health and social services be increased for direct delivery to the First Nations communities located along the Highway of Tears. That the RCMP continue its official investigation or inquiry into the Aboriginal community's assertions on the actual number of missing women.
I think that's one of the main frustrations about the 33 recommendations, that there's virtually no money available to put into place any of the recommendations.
And so what has changed since 2006 is there is the E-Pana group, and they're the group of investigators. So they do updates for the direct families of the victims.
I'm Gary Shinkarik. I'm with the RCMP. I'm an inspector. I'm the officer in charge of the E-Pana investigation, which is commonly referred to as the Highway of Tears. Although I'll mention the Highway of Tears in general deals with so many other social economic issues, and E-Pana really is focusing on the specific murdered and missing women from northern BC.
Project E-Pana began in the fall of 2005 under the E Division Criminal Operations with the task of reviewing and investigating the unsolved cases, with links to Highways 97, 5, and 16. The task force took ownership of 9 investigations in 2006. In 2007, the cases doubled from 9 to 18. Project E-Pana consists of 13 homicide investigations and 5 missing peoples investigations. Some of the cases date as far back as 1969. The actual number of missing and murdered women in northern British Columbia is unknown. The E-Pana investigation number focuses on 18, but the number is argued to be higher than 40. Canada-wide, over 600 Aboriginal women have been reported missing and/or murdered. The majority of these cases have been nothing short of neglected.
There's so many other women missing that were not included. One of them was my sister Theresa Umphrey. My sister was murdered here in Prince George 18 years ago. She was She must have been intoxicated to have been thrown out of the place where she left. And then she got picked up by a truck. He took her way out in a logging road. The police had told us that she was dragged. The guy dragged her in a truck, and that we were not allowed to see her when we went to the funeral because she was not recognizable. And right about the same time before that happened, the same man was picked up for Marnie Blanchard. She was also looking for a ride. So this guy gave her a ride, and he was picked up by then for her, but they didn't have enough evidence, so they let him go. So when they let him go, that's when he killed my sister.
Actually, I was at a mine Christmas party that night, and I was by myself and at 8 o'clock at night, I just didn't feel like being there anymore for whatever reason. I went home. And then at midnight, I got a call from the RCMP asking if Lauren was home. And I said, no, she's staying with her mother. And I said, what's going on? And they said, well, they stopped somebody on the highway towards Fort St. James, and if Lauren's home, then somebody's using her ID because they found it in this person's vehicle. I waited about an hour, and then I called dispatch and I asked them, I told them what was going on, and they were gonna get somebody back to me right away, and that didn't happen for another hour, so I figured I'd just drive up until I saw cops. So I drove up to the site, and then when I got there, the game warden was standing there just white as a ghost. And I told him who I was, and I wanted to know what was going on, and they said they were investigating a homicide, and nobody could go up there, and so I knew what was going on then.
We can announce today that 3 counts of first-degree murder have been laid against 21-year-old Cody Allen Lejabakov.
A portrait of an alleged young serial killer operating in Prince George is emerging tonight. This morning, police revealed that Cody Lejabakov is accused in the murders of 3 women and 1 teenage girl.
Lejabakov was arrested the night of November 27, 2010, when an RCMP officer stopped a suspicious truck pulling onto Highway 16 from an unused logging road. Lejabakov's tracks were retraced along the snowy trail to find the body of 15-year-old Lauren Dawn Leslie, just hours after she had been murdered. Lejabakov is now linked to the murders of 35-year-olds Jill Stuchenko, Cynthia Moss, and an alleged 4th victim, 23-year-old Natasha Montgomery, whose body is yet to be found.
The funeral, I had to explain an empty casket, and because Lauren was supposed to be back on a Thursday, the funeral was set for Saturday, and then they had asked permission for her to go to Pennsylvania for further testing, so we did that, so she wasn't back, so we carried on anyway. What could have happened? Why did it happen? I mean, there's always that question, why, and why me, and why us, and it's just so unreal. It still is, but it's, it's real, but it's surreal, and it's, I don't know, they say everything happens for a reason. I don't know what the reason was, but he was stopped.
In the case with Madison Scott, she came from a small community, and that community came together with such huge support. They all knew Madison and her family, and it's a tragic case where she was a vibrant individual, and here she is at a party with friends, and to not come home when she was supposed to and not to contact friends was completely out of her character. And then the grisly discovery, if you will, going back to the Hogsback Lake and finding her truck and her tent still there, but no Madison, that sends chills up any investigator's back.
We're the parents of 20-year-old Madison Scott. Our daughter Maddie was last seen on Saturday, May 28th out at Hogsback Lake, just south of our hometown of Vanderhoof.
Immediately, the information was sent out to the public, and we had our search and rescue team. We had thousands of volunteers come out. We had our police dog services, Air Service is involved, as well as the dive team, because Hogsback Lake had quite a big lake at that location. And still, we have not been able to find what happened to Maddie, and we haven't been able to find Maddie.
Therefore, we would like to announce that we are offering a reward of up to $15,000 for information leading to the safe return of our daughter, Madison Scott.
People go all over the province and they see posters and they know about it. We have friends on different parts of the province and they all see the posters and they all know what's going on.
Madison joins a list of women and girls who leave their families and communities in shock. With their loved ones gone, they seek answers. The Scott family has been very proactive in raising funds to find their daughter, increasing their reward from $15,000 to $100,000 for any information leading to Madison's discovery.
It's just horrible not knowing.
It's not just 18 women. The Highway of Tears is Theresa Umphrey, Marnie Blanchard, Lauren Leslie, Natasha Montgomery, Madison Scott, and many more. They may not fit the criteria of the E-Pana investigations, but they do form part of a close geographic area in proximity to the highway that is plagued by a history of sociocultural and socioeconomic issues that put women at risk.
I thank you, Lord, for all these people here. We thank you for everything that you have done for us. Please keep us all safe. Every day, every night, keep us all safe. Amen. Thank you.
My aunt, since Ramona went missing, she's always had the walk. I mean, Ramona's remains were found a year later, but she does it anyways because she says, I was there, I know how it felt not to have that closure, and we still don't know what happened to Ramona, right? So there's still that piece that is left open. However, she does the work that she does because of the families that have not found their loved ones.
On May 3rd, 2012, the Oregon Department of State Police Forensic Laboratory obtained a CODIS DNA match. The DNA match was for a U.S. citizen, Bobby Jack Fowler, who was born and spent most of his life in the U.S., has an extensive, violent, and criminal history for crimes including attempted murder, assault with a dangerous weapon, sexual assault, arson, kidnapping, attempting sexual assault, and firearms. While there are many things we do not know, we do know that he was transient and traveled between U.S. states and even countries in a day. He frequented bars and restaurants and was violent towards men and women and picked up hitchhikers.
Colleen was a lovely, sweet, innocent 16-year-old kid. And there are still no words in the world to express how terribly she was wronged. It has been a long wait for answers, and although it is a somewhat unsatisfactory result, because this individual won't have to stand trial for what he did, we are comforted by the fact that he was in prison when he died, and that he can't hurt anyone else.
So often we talk about statistics like the number, there are 582 missing, but each of those women or each of those girls is a devastating loss to a family, is a hole in the heart of a community.
My sister, I really miss my sister. Anything I did, if I had my own business, she was there for me. When I was driving, she would pour my coffee for me, and she'd help me with everything that I've done. She was always there for me. We were just 1 year apart. She was a mother and my sister, and she was just, she was very loving. She was my best friend, and yeah, we just really miss her, and I still miss her,
Our Christmases That was our most cherished time. It was because it was the one time that you can see families, mothers in general, really strive to make happen for their children. And it was the one time she really made sure that I had what I needed to show that, you know, I was loved, and that she always wanted to create that family environment because I was an only child. And Christmases were big, and nothing was out of place during Christmas, you know what I mean? And that's the one thing I remember that she was really good at.
The Highway of Tears isn't just about a number. It's about humanity. It's about erasing our history with discrimination and forging a new future with impartial eyes.
What I would like to do is to do an evaluation around the recommendations that have come to pass since 2006, and I do believe that the government of British Columbia would get a fail. Again, there isn't a coordinated, concerted effort around transportation. We still have the same issues. We still have young women hitchhiking to get to the urban centers.
Clearly, this lack of transportation is exposing women to violence. So it is incumbent upon the government to make transportation accessible, to ensure that women can safely get from point A to point B when they need to get to essential services to conduct, you know, the daily business of life in the North.
Our lives are entangled with the women who've gone missing and been murdered over the years. So it isn't just a matter of one group in our community trying to attack this. It's really such an important thing to realize that as a community we need to be doing more.
It's so critical that we talk to our young people, you know, that we have people that are in leadership roles talk about some of those things that are going on.
And I can only hope that whatever happens out of having these type of discussions leads to those answers being questions that could put families at ease about the situation. You know, like you say, if out of all this, you know, if you save one life, it was well worth it.
As a leader, I think that it's my responsibility to ensure that I share my story, because all it takes is one person to hear that story and it may change their lives.
We've just got to move forward. We can't be feeling sorry for ourselves and stuff.
Yeah.
There's too many people out there that need to be aware.
I have to believe there's hope, otherwise I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. Of course there's hope, there's always hope. I think when we're looking at the whole issue of violence against women, it's not just about one initiative, it's not just about one project. What it is, it's a real changing of mindsets, but not only changing of mindsets, it's changing of hearts.
What these cases ask and what we ask as women's rights researchers on a daily basis is, what does the government owe women? And what are the government responsibilities when it comes to preventing violence against women and investigating it?
I think for me that's the most urgent thing to address, is what's happening to our girls right now, today, and what kind of a future are we leaving our girls? Because the measure of success for First Nations is, what's the seventh generation gonna say about you? And if that seventh generation can't remember you, then you've done nothing. And so I think it's important for us to put this period of devastation and homicide of First Nations women behind us.
That is what is going to be key to ensuring that no other woman goes missing. You know, no other woman is being violated, no other woman becomes vulnerable. And, you know, there's going to be a day that I hope not very long down the road where all women will be protected, all women will be safe, right? And that's what we just have to keep working towards.